All right, welcome everyone to Cerius's Leadership IQ series. If you've attended one of these events in the past, welcome back. If you're new here, we're glad that you're here. Simply put, here at Cerius, we build leadership teams for companies large and small in all industries all over the world. We're able to deliver on that promise based on the executives that we have in our network. These are the results-oriented, people-focused leaders that you want in your company. If you are one of those executives, that a value statement makes sense to you and you align with that, there's an entire ecosystem for you here at Cerius to become an even better leader. We have an executive resource page. We're going to drop the link to that in the chat box below. That gives you a number of the resources that you see on your screen here to just hone your skills, align with what you do best. That way you can do that on repeat and just really articulate what you're better at than anyone else on the planet. We also give you the opportunity on calls like this to learn from other executives in the network and to meet people because life's always done better together. If you own or run a business, there's an entire ecosystem for you that we support here at Cerius. I could talk about this for the next 22 minutes, but I'm a little biased as to how we help clients. So there's a link in the chat box for what our clients actually say. It's better if you hear it from them than it is if you hear it from me.
Hi, thank you, Chris. And I appreciate that you opened it with what's the topic for today, because Jim and I start talking and we forget what the point we're supposed to make. So just remember, Jim, think like a turnaround CEO.
We're not supposed to tell our secrets quite that early in the conversation. Here we go.
We'll get there. But yep. I'm glad we brought it up because that's how we connected. I was interviewing turnaround CEOs for a series I was working on. And there's something so unique about stepping into an organization that has gotten stuck. And I think that any organization that is stuck is a turnaround organization. They've got a great product, they've got a great team, but they just can't figure out how to find the right gear to move forward. And I think there's some benefit for each of us stepping back from our companies and using that view and perspective of someone like you. And I imagine you can step in and see all those pieces and how they can work best together. So I'd love to come on, Jim. I've seen you in action. Yeah. Let's start at the beginning. And I want to, in general, as a turnaround CEO or someone who comes in to work with CEOs to get unstuck, what's going on in the business that you're asked to come in and help?
Yeah. So I was born in Redondo. No, I'm just totally joking. That was your fault that I just did that. In almost every case, it's a situation where the company, for whatever reason, has stalled out. In the way I would describe it, it's just not. It's either not performing from a revenue perspective anymore. It's not performing from a profit perspective anymore. In almost every case, it's stopped growing. And the team in place, for whatever reason, isn't able to figure out why. And they're just trying to, sort of get beyond where their current stage.
And when you're walking in, you've got to get the lay of the land. You don't know much about the company. You don't know all the players. There is so much opportunity there that it's easy to get lost. And you're coming from, you don't know the 10, 20, 30 years history that's there. What are some of the initial areas that you're focusing on when you first step in?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say usually I know quite a bit of the history. I try to spend time before even the initial engagement to try to, come up to speed on, how did the company get started? Are the founders still there? What was their first kind of hero product? What's the current hero product? Is it the same? Is it different? I try to get as much of a frame of reference around that sort of thing as possible before I even, walk in, so that when I get there, we can really kind of focus on, the team. like where are they all mentally at this point? Are they, and I try to meet with them all together, for a first meeting, and let them tell me the story of the company again, because what I'm looking for is, are they still enthusiastic about it, or did they kind of, like, I literally had a CEO of a company once who picked his laptop up and put it on his shoulder with a PowerPoint presentation on it, like next to his ear facing me, and then would, reach up and poke the screen to change slides. And I'm looking at him doing this, and I'm watching the rest of the team in the room, and it's so clear. The rest of the team is crazy embarrassed that this guy's doing this, and so, he kind of gets done. I said, wow, that was really interesting, and I looked at the rest of the team. I said, does he do this a lot? And they're literally, every person in the room rolls their eyes like, oh my gosh, all the time, Well, at least they're healthy enough to be able to say that, right? So they're in a situation where they feel like they can be at least sort of comedically critical of the CEO, in that situation. And that's kind of one of the, first clues, right? Is the team open with each other? Do they appear to like each other? Or do you see a lot of the sort of other side of body language, arms folded, people checking their phones, all of that kind of stuff? That all in the first 45 minutes tells me an awful lot of what I need to know, about, what needs to get fixed.
I appreciate you said 45 minutes, because when you look at stepping in as a turnaround CEO, when we look at interim, and as we're running our companies, we say, well, we'll give it 45 days. No. This is not 45 days. This is 45 minutes. You're able to spot some of that, what's working.
Yeah, it's, look, by the time somebody reaches out for help from somebody like me, first of all, a lot of times it's not even the people in the room that I'm meeting with. It's like I get a call from somebody on the board, and I kind of get sent in, and that's even harder, because then the team's really sitting there like, okay, what do you know that we don't know? Some of that, right? But look, we're not going to turn the company around in 45 minutes. But if you've been doing this for a little while, and I've been doing it for, almost 20 years now, then there are certain things that just pop out at you, and look, it takes a team. You can't, a company doesn't run, a great product does not a company make, there has to be a team. There has to be people thinking about what's next. There has to be people thinking about, what does the customer want? And is the customer happy? And, there has to be people thinking about, hopefully, are we making money? And, all that stuff. And, if you don't have a team, or if you have a dysfunctional team, then if you don't get that fixed as quickly as possible, then the chances that you're going to be successful, or that I'm going to be successful helping you turn your company around, extremely slim, because you just spend all your time chasing your tail.
I want to dig into that a little bit, because we've seen a lot of companies where they can have the greatest CEO in the world, but without the right leadership team and the team working together and moving it forward, they can have the greatest product. The team's not moving forward. You're pulling a number of trucks and tractor trailers up a hill, versus if you have the right leadership team, you're just kind of pushing one person up a hill. The synergy that's created within that leadership team, especially when you're stepping in from the outside, what are some reasons that you've seen where they're not working as a team? They've just lost that drive, that focus. What is it that's not working?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's usually kind of dysfunctional structure, or dysfunctional, personalities in the organization, right? And part of this is that you have to be pragmatic, right? One of the things I'm always curious about when I meet with a CEO, who's asking for some help is, do they personally feel like they need help, or do they feel like they actually know what to do? And if somebody would just let them do it, they would, go ahead and get it done, right? In the first case, we're more likely to be successful. I'm more likely to be successful because the person's listening and, wants to improve. In the second case, almost always I find that that's actually the problem, right? CEOs are mistitled, right? We think that we're, the chief executive officer, what does that title actually mean, right? It means that I'm the chief executive, what do you wear like feathers? Like what makes you the chief executive, right? And the fact is that I try to help CEOs understand, your job is not, you're not the chief executive. You should be titled the CDO. You're the chief decision officer, right? And all of your team should be titled COOs. They're chief opinion officers, right? Their job is to tell you places where you can improve. Their job is to tell you places where things aren't quite as good as you think they are. Their job is actually to tell you when you're wrong, right? And you have to foster an environment where you get that kind of creativity flowing into the conversation in order to get the ideas moving that are going to help you start moving forward again, right? And so, and then what the team is looking for once they voice an opinion and say, hey, I think this is wrong and we should fix it, is they're looking for you to make a decision. Yes, you're right, let's go. Or no, I don't think that's quite right. Here's what I think we should do instead, right? And if all you do is say, oh, well, let's appoint a committee and have another meeting about that next week, then the really smart people in the organization are frankly likely to sort of say, you know what, I'm just not valued here. And so I'm going to move on and go do something else.
So when you're stepping in and you want that forward moment, you want the team working together, what specifically are you looking for on the team? Who do you need on that leadership team?
Well, it kind of depends on where the real problems lie, right? Look, I've walked into companies where I brought in by the board because they can't quite figure out what's going on financially, right? And so in that case, obviously what I'm looking toward is, where's the financial leadership, right? How is the financial leadership communicating with the board, and why is the board confused about the financial performance of the company? I mean, at its root, that's a pretty basic set of, kind of reports to provide and explain. Almost every company has almost the exact same set of reports. They may have, they may drop the last 9 zeros, on the report if they're a giant company, right? But they're still going to have, some basic stuff. And what I find is that generally boards get nervous and some CEOs get nervous for good reason when the numbers are confusing, right? And so in that case, I'm looking for is a CFO who doesn't start every sentence with the word well, how are things, did we make a profit last month? Well, it depends. If you look at it this way, we sort of made a profit. And if you look at it that way, we didn't, I don't want to hear well from a CEO. I want to hear yes or no. No equivocation, no nothing. I want like straight ahead financial answers. Done, right? If the company's struggling with growth, right, then you're looking for idea people. Like, who are the people around the table who are looking at the marketplace and looking at the product and looking at the consumer and saying, what is the consumer really looking for now? Does our product match that? How do we do it? And when they start talking about it, do they start to get passionate about it? Do they talk faster? Do they get more, do they talk with their hands like I do, right? It's all that stuff that you're kind of looking for. And, quite frankly, in sales and marketing, I'm also looking for, do you love the job you do, right? Or, if you're in marketing, do you understand that part of your job is measurement, right? So when you tell me about your job, you're not just telling me about your latest, cool advertising campaign or marketing idea. You're telling me that, in the last 3 months, we had a, 20 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction as measured by, this actual provable metric that I think makes some sense, right? And so, it's kind of like that. You're sort of looking at the various areas of the company to figure out like who does have health, who has momentum, who's got ideas, who's going somewhere, and then trying to figure out, how does the company test the ideas and figure out, is this a good idea or a bad idea, right? The big CEO always thinks they have to come up with all the ideas themselves. In fact, in almost every situation in healthy companies, the ideas rarely come from the CEO. They come from all over an organization, and the CEO is basically grabbing that input, testing it against the marketplace and what they know about the business, and then making sure the business can move forward.
I love that you hit on that. I call it a myth and misconception on how is it that I can bring someone to come in from outside the company, a president, a CEO, anyone to come in and help it succeed. They haven't been here the last 10, 15, 20 years. They don't know all of the ins and outs. And what you're saying is that works for you.
Right. Yeah.
To know the ins and outs.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest things that I always try to explain to a founder, CEO, somebody like that is, look, there's no question in my mind, your business and your industry way better than I do. Right. What I'm really looking for is, are there other people on the team that also know it that well? Do they have great ideas that they've just, for whatever reason, been unable to, get moving forward? Do they, or is it a situation, and this happens, right, where it's all of a sudden, it's like that group of people in that room, they just don't care anymore, right? And so, and that's the other side of it, right? The sort of the easier ones are the ones where you walk in and it's kind of like there's creative energy and you just have to figure out a way to unlock it, right? The really tough ones are the ones where you walk in and it's like you just know, like I'm exhausted when I walk out of the first meeting because I know that this is a group of people that for the company to succeed needs to probably be replaced. Right. So it's everything lives in a spectrum between one end of that continuum and the other. And you often have individuals who are in different places on that spectrum. And sometimes that actually, drives conflict on a team as well. We tried that 4 years ago and it didn't work.
And whether replaced or they just, as you mentioned, there are those smart people in the organization. They may or may not be on the leadership team, and they just need to be given permission to voice their opinion and share. And as you went through that leadership team and who you're looking for, you mentioned finance. I want to know that they're on top of everything and they know the answers. The answers are not dependent or situational. They are concrete.
Yep.
Marketing, sales, I want to know that they're thinking about the future, the next generation, they're measuring it, they're testing it. One of the big things we're seeing right now that there's a gap in organizations is human resources.
Yeah, HR and operations.
Yeah, what are you looking for from those?
HR, when I've been a CEO of a company, I've always wanted HR to report to me. And the reason is because I've always felt like in my organizations, it was the most important function we had. I was actually, almost fine with the CFO reporting to somebody else if HR reported to me, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of organizations decide, for whatever reason, they think that human resources is all about money. And so they end up putting HR in finance. They put HR, they have HR report to the CFO. And to me, that's a mistake because your people are by far the most valuable asset you have in a company, right? They're the engine that's going to drive forward the idea, right? They're the mouthpiece that's going to communicate with the customer, right? To me, that's a company is 100% the people, right? And I feel like if you put HR in, and a lot of times you'll see like, well, we don't let our HR person, what is that title, right? We don't let our HR person come to our management meetings, First of all, what's the whole idea of let, as though they need permission, right? And second, why don't you feel like their voice is important? That's critically important. So to me, that's critical. And what I'm looking for in a person who's going to run HR with me is really basically sort of two things. They're great at finding people who are going to be successful in a position, whether or not they match the exact criteria of the position description we put out in the first place, right? I love an HR person who pushes somebody in my office and says, hey, you should listen to this person talk about this thing because I think they're going to be great for this job, right? And the other thing I'm looking for from HR, and I realize I've gone on a bit, I'm kind of passionate about this topic. The other thing I'm looking for from HR is somebody who will walk into my office, shut the door and say, hey, you messed up. Here's where, here's why, because I'm, a little bullheaded, probably doesn't surprise anybody looking at me. And here's what we need to do about it to fix it, right? Because trust me, I'm totally bull in a china shop. I need that help.
Jim, there's a reason why we could make that in and of itself a topic for Leadership IQ based on the reactions I'm seeing on the screen, the reactions, Jack. And this is what we're hearing from clients right now is I need my HR leader to be the strongest person on my leadership team. So there's no question on that. So we've got some of the great, let's say we figure out who we have, who we need to develop, who it doesn't make sense. They don't have the passion. You're making the adjustments. You're trying to get that synergy. You're working on getting that leadership working together. There are leading indicators and there are lagging indicators. Let's look at some of the leading indicators let's not wait the 6-12 months for the revenues and the profits. How do you know it's working? How do you know you've made the right decisions and you're going in the right direction?
Yeah, honestly, you can feel it. It's kind of hard. It's in one respect, it's a little bit harder to describe, right? I love, when I walk in, I'm an early riser. So, when I'm working in a company, I'm usually there before anybody else gets there, and I'm not trying to make a point or anything. I just can't sleep. So I get up and I like it when it's quiet in the morning. I can go, do my stuff. And then, around 10 o'clock, I love to go over to wherever coffee, people grab coffee. I like to kind of stop by cubicles on the way or, offices or whatever and just check in. These days, how do you do that? It's like, you got to drop in on Zoom calls. Nobody thought they invited you, but nobody thought you'd come, right? So, it's a bunch of stuff like that where you can get a feel for the health of the company from, the banter, right? Between the various teams. You get a sense of, and then also you start to feel the energy rising in terms of the creative attention to the challenges the company's facing. So I get an email out of the blue one day from a guy who reports to somebody in an area where, there's a big problem, right? And the email always starts with, I don't know if I should be sending you this email, so please don't get me in trouble, but, this is the problem, and I think that we could probably solve it, but we need, we need this, or we need that, right? And you start to get more, and look, trust me, some of these ideas are not good ideas, right? It's like, whoever came up with the phrase "the customer's always right" is an idiot. I'm just sorry, but that's just true, right? And so, but you still you want to honor the creative energy and giving you, the courage to raise the hand, right? And then go sit with those folks. Even like I used to love walking out to the lab, right? And sitting down in the middle of the lab and like saying, what do you guys think? Right? And just letting people say, hey, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? Right? And then sort of gather that information, look at the boss and say, well, what if we do this? Or what if we do that? Right? And God help the boss who says, well, we tried that 3 years ago and it didn't work.
That's why it sometimes helps to have an outside perspective because they don't know that history of what did or didn't work, right. And they don't know better, and they know to ask those questions. And we started off today we talked about, and we were struggling with the topic for today on thinking like a turnaround CEO and unleashing the synergy of a team. And I think it all goes together because you have had a lot of discussions on. There is no formula. There's no magic sauce. It's just walking in and getting everyone to work together to focus on one thing, try it, see if it works, and then you change your focus.
Yeah. And I think honestly, I think that's a big point right there, right? You can't, in a lot of cases where a company's kind of going sideways, it's kind of the grasping at straws, mentality all of a sudden, where, I'll say, what's the plan to get out of this stage, right? And the plan is we have these 20 different ideas we're chasing, right? And you look at that and you're like, well, how are you going to accomplish 20 things?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the answer is you're not. You gotta figure out, like, what's the big thing, right? If the big thing is our primary product isn't selling anymore, right, then what you really ought to be diving into is why, what changed, what's different. And it's so hard to just stay focused on one thing. But to me, it's really critically important. And look, sometimes you focus on that one thing for 2 weeks and that's it, right? You get to the end of that 2-week period and you're like, you know what, you're right. This product is not going to sell anymore, or at least that's not going to sell well anymore. Right. So now we're going to move it on. We're going to move it to another quadrant in the product matrix, and we're going to use our collective expertise to build something that's cool that we can get launched more or less immediately, get this thing moving and get, let's get going. Right. So, hopefully you have the resources to do that. Sometimes you don't, sometimes, look, not every turnaround makes it. Right. And there's that too.
And as crazy as that sounds, look, this thing that's worked with us for the last 20 years, we're going to put it over here. We're going to launch something new. You're able to do that because you've got the right people on the team. They've got the passion. They're innovative and they're thinking about the next steps, as you mentioned.
Yep.
Before I wrap up, and I've got a few more questions here, I'm going to have I always like to continue the conversation because there's been a number of comments. There's a lot of nodding. I can see some people actually mouthing some things, fortunately, they remembered to put themselves on mute. They wanted to be part of the conversation. I welcome everyone to be part of the conversation. Click the link in chat. Please share I have a feeling there's probably going to be a 10-to-1 comment on HR versus any other comment. What's your one thing of how you would move the needle, how you would think like a turnaround CEO? And you're welcome to comment there. As we look at what you do on a day-to-day basis, you step into companies and you either take on the role as, now I don't want to call it CEO, you've killed me, John. We're going to call it the chief decision maker. You get the resources, you put together the team and you make the decisions, or you are coaching them and helping to guide them and make them from CEOs to CDOs. What are some key pieces of advice you would give CEO to help them better leverage their team to get unstuck?
I think, so first of all, for me these days, it's much more the second than the first situation, right? It's pretty rare for me to actually go into a company in that kind of CEO, CDO sort of role myself, right? Much more often going in more in a coaching role. It's such basic stuff that sometimes it sounds really pedantic, right? Most CEOs that I encounter have one of two problems. They either have lost the ability to listen, right? And so, they go into every meeting feeling like they basically have to own the floor and do all the talking, and you can sort of see that, and so coaching people a lot on, hey, this person said this really smart thing, and I don't think you actually heard them, because I think what you were doing was sitting there while they were talking, thinking about what you were going to say next, right? So trying to get, especially, look, CEOs have egos, so you got to figure out how to say that in a way that's not insulting, right? So they're either in that mode, right, where they can't hear anything anymore, or they're in a mode where they're very fearful and they're hearing too much, right? It's like every criticism, is something they have to sweat about and, live through and, whatever. It's like, you know what? Take a breath. Built a great company. You got a great team, right? So, let's figure out, let's get this straightened out and get it. So it's like one kind of needs a little bit of a, reality check, and the other needs a pep talk, right? And I know it sounds really basic, but in a lot of cases, to get that initial motion in place, that's all it takes. And then it's more of a thing of reacting to how the organization is changing and feeding the parts of change you're excited about, you want to see fed and moving forward, and then not discouraging change that's happening in other places, or not discouraging the impetus for it, but maybe figuring out how to guide the energy so it's moving in the right direction, right? And for me, it's just a lot of listening. It's funny because all my friends are like, how do you do this? Because you never listen, it's a lot of listening. And it's a lot of sort of thinking about, like, what did I know what they said? Did I hear what they really said? Right. A lot of that kind of stuff. But then encourage, right? And sometimes encouragement is blunt truth, but a lot of times it's just, you can do this. You got this, it's heavy lifting, but you can do it.
And I love that we don't have to do it alone. Even they say, as a business owner, CEO, it's lonely at the top. It doesn't have to be lonely. Whether it's building a right leadership team who can give you that feedback and be that honest, or bringing someone like you, Jim, in, or an interim to do it together, to take that road together, to figure out who do I need to figure out and solve these problems, and where are we going to go. And I appreciate that perspective. I'm just glad that Chris was on mute as you were talking about CEOs and egos, and no comment, Chris, on yours truly. We won't say which camp I fall into. I always have to be careful on these calls as comments are being made about business owners and leaders, and we're all self-aware of what we do. And when we do need to ask for outside help, and thank goodness, I'm surrounded by incredible people like Jim and Chris, and that's how we're able to keep that forward movement and that energy going. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today, being such a great partner and helping not just CEOs, but you're helping companies and you're helping leadership teams get that forward movement. Please click the link in the chat. We'd love to hear what you think is the number one strategy or your top piece of advice for companies to get unstuck, get that forward movement. And we'll see you next time on Leadership IQ. Thank you, Jim.